Every time you react to someone else's chaos, you hand them the pen that writes your story. Freedom begins the moment you rip it back and refuse to play the part they've scripted for you. Attention is one of the most powerful forces a human being possesses. It's not just focus, it's energy, vitality, the very essence of what gives meaning and structure to the world around you. What you attend to grows stronger, what you neglect fades away. That's true in your work, in your relationships, in your inner life. But it's also true in the darker domains of human interaction, especially when you're dealing with someone who thrives on emotional chaos. For such people, your attention is their oxygen. They don't need to win an argument or prove a point. They need your reaction, your emotional engagement, your energy. When you understand that, you begin to see why ignoring manipulation isn't avoidance, it's liberation. When someone is histrionic, their identity isn't anchored in truth or stability. It's tethered to how others times respond times to them. Their sense of self is constantly reinforced by the emotional ripples they can generate in others. If they can make you angry, guilty, confused, or sympathetic, they've succeeded. Because to them, attention, any attention, is validation. It tells them they exist, that they matter, that their drama has gravity. And so they provoke, they exaggerate, they distort, all to keep your gaze fixed on them. The tragedy is that once you're caught in that dynamic, you start to feel responsible for their emotional state. You begin to believe that if you just explain yourself better, stay calmer, or give a little more, things will stabilize. But that's the trap. The more attention you offer, the more the cycle feeds itself. This is why attention has to be treated as sacred. Every moment you spend attending to manipulation is a moment stolen from your peace, your growth, your truth. People underestimate how costly divided attention really is. When your emotional energy is constantly hijacked, you lose the ability to think clearly, to rest, to pursue meaningful aims. You start existing in reaction instead of intention. And that's a slow form of psychological erosion, one that happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, until you wake up one day realizing you've been living in someone else's emotional script. Withdrawing attention from manipulation doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means seeing clearly. It means recognizing that some people don't want resolution. They want engagement. They need you to play your role so the drama can continue. When you step out of that role, when you no longer provide the emotional feedback they crave, you begin to dismantle the system that empowers them. At first, it feels cruel. You'll be accused of being distant, dismissive, uncaring. But what's really happening is that the manipulative structure is collapsing because its source of energy, you, is no longer available. The difficulty lies in how seductive emotional engagement can be. We like to think we can fix people, that if we just stay compassionate enough, patient enough, understanding enough, they'll finally see the truth. But the truth isn't the goal for those addicted to attention, the performance is. And you cannot reason with performance. You can only choose whether or not to participate in it. Once you realize that, your entire framework for dealing with emotional manipulation changes. You stop trying to out-argue it or out-feel it. You simply stop feeding it. Attention then becomes a form of moral currency. You decide where it goes. You decide what grows in the garden of your mind. Give your attention to chaos, and chaos flourishes. Give it to order, and peace takes root. The histrionic thrives when you react, when your focus becomes tethered to their volatility. But when you withdraw that focus, when you stop rewarding instability with your presence, you begin to shift the balance of power back toward truth, toward stability, toward yourself. People often mistake boundaries for cruelty because they confuse kindness with compliance. They think that saying yes, always being available, always accommodating, is what makes them good, compassionate, or loving. But there's a profound misunderstanding at the heart of that belief. True compassion isn't the absence of limits, it's the presence of integrity. Boundaries are not built to shut people out. They're built to keep what's true, stable, and good alive inside of you. They are the structure that prevents chaos from consuming everything that makes you capable of love in the first place. When you set a boundary, you're not saying, I don't care about you. You're saying, I care enough about both of us not to let this become destructive. That's a moral act, not a selfish one. Because if you allow dysfunction to persist unchallenged, if you continually yield your peace for the sake of temporary harmony, you're not doing something noble. You're allowing falsehood to reign where truth should stand. A person without boundaries becomes a tool for someone else's will, and that isn't compassion, it's submission. Boundaries define the territory of responsibility. They tell you where times you times end and where times the other times begins. Without that demarcation, relationships become arenas of projection where one person's chaos becomes the other's burden. You start to mistake pity for love and exhaustion for loyalty. But love that costs you your self-respect is not love, it's servitude disguised as virtue. Boundaries rescue you from that trap. They restore order by insisting that you are not responsible for managing another person's instability, only for managing your response to it. It takes courage to hold that line, because when you begin to establish boundaries, people who benefited from your lack of them will resist. They'll accuse you of being heartless, detached, or arrogant. They'll twist moral language to make you doubt yourself. But that resistance is evidence that the boundary is necessary. Those who truly care for you will respect limits, even if they don't like them at first. Those who seek control will see boundaries as an obstacle, and that tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. The moral nature of boundaries lies in what they protect. They protect truth from distortion, peace from manipulation, and love from corruption. They ensure that your giving remains voluntary, not coerced, that your compassion remains conscious, not compulsive. They keep your yes meaningful because it's no longer the default, it's a choice. In that sense, boundaries are an act of respect toward reality itself. They acknowledge that not every demand is just, not every emotion is honest, and not every cry for help deserves your total surrender. To live without boundaries is to let your empathy be weaponized against you. To live with them is to accept that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no, step back, and refuse to enable what's false. That's not cruelty, it's clarity, and clarity is the foundation of moral strength. Every time you react to someone else's chaos, you hand them the pen that writes your story. Freedom begins the moment you rip it back and refuse to play the part they've scripted for you. Compassion is one of the highest virtues, but like all virtues, it becomes dangerous when it's unbalanced. Compassion without discernment doesn't heal, it harms. It enables dysfunction, rewards manipulation, and confuses pity with love. You can care deeply about people, but if you can't distinguish between genuine suffering and emotional coercion, your compassion becomes a weapon that can be turned against you. People who prey on empathy understand this. They know that good-hearted individuals fear being seen as unkind, and they exploit that fear to secure control. When your compassion lacks discernment, it stops being moral, it becomes naive. Discernment gives compassion its structure. It's what separates mercy from foolishness. It asks the question, asterisk, is my help actually helping? Asterisk. Because sometimes what looks like kindness on the surface is actually complicity in disguise. When you constantly rescue someone from the consequences of their own behavior, you teach them that chaos has no cost. You tell them that manipulation works, that emotion trumps accountability. That's not compassion, that's collaboration with pathology. And the more you do it, the more the pattern solidifies until your entire relationship revolves around managing their instability instead of encouraging their growth. Real compassion has boundaries because it respects truth. It doesn't rush to soothe every discomfort because it understands that pain can be instructive. It doesn't offer endless forgiveness to someone who refuses to change because it recognizes that forgiveness without transformation is meaningless. Discernment allows you to see when someone is genuinely struggling and when they're performing struggle to maintain control. It allows you to differentiate between vulnerability and manipulation. Without that awareness, compassion turns into self-sacrifice, and self-sacrifice, when done for the wrong reasons, leads to resentment and emptiness. There's a moral dimension to discernment that often goes unrecognized. It demands that you think, not just feel. It asks you to balance heart and intellect, emotion and reason. When you act purely out of emotion, you can be easily deceived because emotional appeals are powerful. But when you bring discernment into your compassion, you start to see patterns instead of moments. You see whether the person in front of you actually wants help or just wants attention. You start to notice if their crises always emerge when you begin to focus on yourself. That awareness doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. The difficult truth is that some people do not want healing. They want sympathy without accountability. They want to remain the victim because victimhood grants them moral superiority and control over the people who feel obligated to save them. If your compassion is blind, you become their enabler. You feed their dependence, and in doing so, you lose your strength. Discernment allows you to step out of that dynamic. It lets you offer compassion where it can bear fruit and withdraw it where it only breeds dysfunction. It transforms your empathy from something that can be used against you into something that serves truth and integrity. When you've spent a long time entangled in someone else's chaos, you start to forget what reality feels like. Your emotions become dictated by their moods, your sense of peace by their approval, your clarity by their confusion. It's like living in a house of mirrors. Every reflection is distorted, and over time, you begin to lose sight of your own face. Ignoring pathology, truly ignoring it, is the first act of returning to reality. It's not passive. It's an act of strength, a declaration that you will no longer allow distortion to define your world. The moment you stop feeding dysfunction with your attention, you begin to reorient yourself toward truth, and truth has a grounding effect. The histrionic, the manipulative, the perpetually dramatic, these personalities thrive on reaction. Their sense of existence depends on how much emotional chaos they can provoke in others. If you respond with anger, confusion, guilt, or sympathy, you've already entered their psychological arena, and now they control the game. When you ignore them, you remove the arena itself. They no longer have a space to perform. At first, they'll escalate louder outbursts, sharper accusations, grander displays of victimhood. But if you remain steadfast, if your silence holds, their power begins to collapse. The false narrative can't sustain itself without an audience. Ignoring pathology doesn't mean denying its existence. It means refusing to engage with it on its terms. You recognize that the person's emotional storms are not yours to calm, their drama not yours to participate in. You see their words and behaviors for what they are, attempts to draw you back into the chaos, and you decline the invitation. It's difficult at first because it feels unnatural. You've been conditioned to respond, to explain, to defend, to help. But once you begin to see the pattern clearly, the compulsion to fix starts to fade. You begin to reclaim the mental space that was once consumed by their volatility. As your attention withdraws, something remarkable happens inside you. Your nervous system starts to settle. You realize how much of your anxiety was never really yours. You start to think more clearly, sleep more deeply, breathe more freely. You notice small joys again, quiet mornings, honest conversations, simple peace. That's the texture of reality returning. Chaos thrives on constant noise, but truth lives in stillness. When you stop reacting, that stillness begins to grow, and in it, you find yourself again. Ignoring pathology also restores moral clarity. It reminds you that compassion doesn't mean compliance, and that silence can be stronger than argument. It helps you distinguish between what deserves your attention and what merely demands it. The histrionic depends on urgency, on making everything seem like a crisis, but reality is patient. It doesn't need to scream to be heard. Once you tune back into that quiet frequency of truth, you begin to see how distorted your perception had become under constant manipulation. Reality is simple, calm, and consistent, and it only returns when you stop feeding the noise that drowns it out. Freedom begins the moment you realize you no longer have to participate in someone else's chaos. For so long, you've been cast in a role you never auditioned for: the caretaker, the apologist, the stabilizer, the one who absorbs the emotional fallout of another person's instability. You start believing that's who you are, that your worth lies in how well you manage someone else's storms. But that's an illusion, a false identity constructed through repetition and guilt. When you decide to stop performing in their drama, you reclaim something profound. You reclaim authorship over your own life. People who thrive on manipulation write elaborate emotional scripts. They craft scenes of crisis, betrayal, and reconciliation, all designed to keep you emotionally tethered. Each reaction you give is a line in their play. The more you respond, the longer the story runs. When you stop reacting, when you no longer deliver the expected dialogue, the production begins to crumble. They lose their narrative power because you're no longer co-authoring the fiction. Freedom, then, is not about confrontation, it's about non-participation. You simply refuse to act out the script. The transition out of that dynamic is not easy. It feels unnatural to stop engaging because your empathy has been trained to equate silence with cruelty. You'll feel guilt, even fear, as though by not responding, you're abandoning your moral duty. But what you're really doing is redefining it. You're realizing that enabling dysfunction is not kindness, it's avoidance of responsibility. True responsibility means aligning your actions with truth, even when it disrupts the emotional patterns you've grown accustomed to. The moment you choose truth over comfort, you begin to experience the first real taste of freedom. When you stop performing, your perspective shifts dramatically. You start to see how much of your life was built around managing other people's perceptions. You notice how much energy was wasted explaining yourself to those who were never listening, apologizing for things that weren't wrong, trying to prove your good intentions to people committed to misunderstanding you. Once you step out of that loop, a strange silence fills the space. At first, it's unsettling. There's no drama, no emotional tug of war, but eventually that silence becomes peace. That's the sound of freedom settling in. You begin to understand that freedom isn't loud or dramatic. It's steady, quiet, grounded. It's the ability to choose where your attention goes and where it doesn't. It's the capacity to live according to your own principles rather than reacting to someone else's manipulations. You no longer seek validation from chaos because you see it for what it is, a system designed to enslave your focus. By refusing to perform, you dismantle the system itself. You learn that your peace doesn't need permission, your boundaries don't require approval, and your worth doesn't depend on anyone's recognition.